If someone told you that the most monumental shift in human history was scheduled for April Fool's Day, you would probably laugh it off as a well-timed prank. But mark your calendars for April 1st, 2026, because on that day, the joke is entirely on gravity. Humanity is going back to the moon. And this time, we are not just visiting.
It really does sound like a setup for a punchline, doesn't it? But the reality of that date is staggering. For over half a century, the lunar surface has been completely silent. The footprints left by the Apollo astronauts have just been sitting there, perfectly preserved in the vacuum of space, waiting. We have spent decades looking back at those black and white photos, treating the moon like a museum. But in 2026, it transitions from a museum to a construction site.
That is exactly the shift in mindset that is so hard to grasp. When we think of the moon landings, we think of planting a flag, taking a few bouncy steps, collecting some rocks, and rushing back home before the oxygen runs out. It was the ultimate camping trip. But what begins in April 2026 is fundamentally different. We are talking about the foundation of a permanent human presence. Why now, though? Why did we wait 50 years just to decide that we suddenly need to go back?
The camping trip analogy is absolutely perfect. Apollo was a sprint to prove we could do it. It was driven by Cold War politics, not long-term sustainability. Once we proved we could pitch a tent in the ultimate wilderness, the funding dried up and we went home. But the return in 2026 is driven by a completely different engine. We are not going back to prove a point. We are going back to build an infrastructure. And the biggest reason for why now comes down to a massive technological leap and a staggering discovery we made at the lunar South Pole.
You are talking about the water ice.
Exactly. For the longest time, we thought the moon was just a bone-dry rock, but hidden in the permanently shadowed craters at the South Pole, where sunlight hasn't reached for billions of years, there are massive deposits of frozen water. And in the context of space exploration, water is not just something you drink. It is the absolute holy grail.
Because it can be broken down, you split the H2O, and suddenly you have oxygen to breathe, and hydrogen and oxygen to burn as rocket fuel.
Right. Think of it as the ultimate cosmic gas station. Lifting heavy liquid fuel out of Earth's massive gravity well is absurdly expensive. It is the main reason space travel has been so limited. What if you can manufacture rocket fuel on the moon, where the gravity is only 1/6 of Earth's? The entire solar system suddenly opens up. The 2026 mission isn't just about the moon. It is about using the moon as a stepping stone. It is the staging ground for Mars and beyond.
So, we are essentially turning the moon into an offshore drilling rig, but for water. That brings up a really fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying point. The 2026 return isn't just NASA. It is a massive web of commercial partnerships. You have private companies building the landers, designing the spacesuits, and, eventually, mining the ice. We are exporting the human economic machine into the cosmos. Are we ready for the commercialization of the moon?
That is the philosophical tightrope we are walking right now. On one hand, the privatization of space is the only reason this is happening. NASA simply doesn't have the blank check budget it had in the 1960s. By partnering with private aerospace companies, they have drastically lowered the cost of entry. But you are absolutely right to point out the risks. We are taking human nature, with all of its ambition, greed, and territorial instincts, and projecting it onto a pristine celestial body. There are treaties, of course, like the Outer Space Treaty, which says no nation can claim sovereignty over the moon, but mining rights, commercial extraction, that is a massive gray area.
It really is. It feels like we are watching the opening scenes of a gold rush. And history tells us that gold rushes are rarely orderly. But let's step back from the geopolitics for a second and look at the sheer human element of this. Imagine waking up on April 2nd, 2026. You look up at the night sky, you see the moon, and you know with absolute certainty that there are human beings up there, not just visiting, but living, working, sleeping in the dirt of another world. How does that change the human psyche?
I think it fundamentally rewrites our definition of home. We have a concept called the overview effect, which astronauts experience when they look back at Earth from orbit. They see this fragile blue marble without borders, and it profoundly changes their perspective on humanity. But what happens when the rest of us look up and see the lights of a lunar base? It will be a constant glowing reminder that we are no longer confined to a single planet. It might be the exact psychological shock our species needs. We spend so much time looking down at our screens, arguing over invisible borders and fleeting crises. Having a permanent outpost in the sky forces us to look up. It forces us to think in terms of centuries rather than election cycles.
That is a beautiful way to frame it. But I have to play devil's advocate here, because there is a very loud chorus of critics who look at the billions of dollars being poured into the 2026 lunar return and ask a very simple question. Why are we spending this money in space when Earth is on fire? We have climate change, resource depletion, poverty. Isn't it a bit arrogant to start building a second home when the first one is in such desperate need of repair?
That is the most common critique, and it is a completely valid emotional response. But it fundamentally misunderstands how space exploration works. We don't pack up billions of dollars in a rocket and burn it on the moon. Every single cent of that money is spent right here on Earth, paying engineers, scientists, and manufacturers. But more importantly, the technology we are forced to invent to survive on the moon is exactly the technology we need to save Earth.
You mean closed-loop systems and resource management?
Precisely. The moon is the harshest, most unforgiving environment imaginable. There is no air, the temperature swings are lethal, and radiation is constant. To survive there, you have to invent incredibly efficient water purification systems. You have to figure out how to grow crops in totally sterile environments with minimal water. You have to master solar energy and high-density battery storage. If you can engineer a habitat that keeps humans alive and thriving on the dead surface of the moon, you have just invented the exact technologies needed to combat drought, famine, and energy crises back on Earth. Space exploration isn't an escape hatch. It is a laboratory for Earth survival.
So, going to the moon is actually the ultimate climate change initiative. That is a brilliant pivot in perspective. It makes the April 2026 launch not just an exploratory mission, but a survival imperative. Let's talk about the physical reality of that day. The sheer violence of a rocket launch, the silence of the transit, and then the descent. The technology has evolved so much since Apollo. What will it actually look and feel like for the crew stepping out onto the South Pole?
It will be entirely alien, even compared to the old footage we are used to. The south pole of the moon is dramatic. Because of the angle of the sun, the shadows are pitch black and stretch for miles, while the peaks of the craters are bathed in blinding, constant sunlight. It is a landscape of absolute extremes, and the crew won't be wearing those puffy, rigid white suits from the 60s. The new suits are highly articulated. They allow for full mobility. The astronauts will be able to bend, kneel, and walk normally, rather than doing that awkward bunny hop. They are essentially wearing personalized, form-fitting spacecrafts.
And they won't be landing in a tiny tin can either. The vehicles being designed for this are massive. We are talking about multi-story landers, elevators descending to the surface. The scale of the architecture is breathtaking. It really drives home the idea that we are moving in, not just dropping by.
The scale is what guarantees permanence. They will be setting up solar arrays, deploying autonomous rovers to scout the ice deposits, and laying the groundwork for habitats that will eventually be covered in lunar regolith, the moon dust, to protect future crews from radiation. The April 2026 mission is the spark. It is the moment the blueprint becomes a reality.
It is fascinating to think about the people who will take those first steps. The pressure on their shoulders will be astronomical. They aren't just representing a country. They are representing a new era of human evolution. They will be the bridge between the earthbound history of our species and our multiplanetary future.
And they will be fully aware of that weight. Every word they say, every action they take, will be broadcast in ultra-high definition to billions of people back home. But beneath the spectacle, the real triumph will be the quiet moments. The moment they successfully extract the first drop of water from lunar ice, the moment the first habitat seals and holds pressure. Those are the quiet, unglamorous milestones that will actually secure our future in the stars.
It really does put our daily earthly struggles into a profound new context. We are standing on the edge of a new ocean, preparing to wade in permanently. The April 2026 mission is going to be the ultimate test of human ingenuity, cooperation, and courage. It forces us to ask not just what we are capable of building, but what kind of species we want to become as we expand into the dark.
That is the ultimate question. The moon is a blank slate. It is a mirror reflecting our greatest ambitions and our deepest flaws. When we return, we have the unprecedented opportunity to do it right, to build a society based on science, sustainability, and collaboration rather than conquest and extraction. The technology is ready. The rockets are being fueled. The only variable left is us.
A blank slate waiting for a new kind of footprint. As we count down the days to April 1st, 2026, the anticipation is only going to build. It is not just a date on a calendar. It is a dividing line in human history. Everything before it is the era of a single planet species. Everything after it is the great unknown. When you step outside tonight and look up at that glowing silver disk in the sky, take a long, hard look, because very soon it won't just be the moon anymore. It will be our newest neighborhood.